Shout out to Owen, who edits these, because I always throw him just an absolute curveball of an intro, and I vowed that I'd start slowing that down a little bit and have a bit more respect to our editing team, specifically Owen in this case. So, Shakespeare's Othello is one of his better tragedies in my opinion. It tells the story of a great and respected man who, through the deceit of others and through his own jealousy, turns to darkness basically. It's a very tragic tale, but Othello's not really the main character, even though the play is named after him. The main character, in my opinion, is the villain, Iago. Iago is regarded as one of Shakespeare's greatest ever villains. He's a trusted advisor to Othello. He gets in his ear, he basically brings him down, and he does so by adapting to the situation. All throughout the play, he adapts to whatever's put in front of him. He improvises, he uses information that he's gathered in different places. He plays a very deceitful and devious game. Yeah, Chris Jericho is the... Let's talk about Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho is a bit of a hot topic at the minute, isn't he? Because of course we've just come off the back of that incredibly intense blood and guts match on Wednesday night, but obviously one that had a bit of a controversial ending, or a divisive ending. It really set social media ablaze, didn't it? And I'm not going to go too much into my thoughts on the finish, because this isn't really the series for that, and I'm sure that you've all got your own opinions anyway, and probably aren't going to sway from them too easily. But hopefully, one opinion that I'm guessing isn't too divisive is the fact that Chris Jericho, on the balance of his entire career, must go down as one of the greatest of all time. As always, of course, we're going to be breaking down the reasons into 5 key reasons, but I've set a little bit of a challenge for myself. I thought I'm not going to make any of the reasons his evolution over the course of time, because everybody talks about Jericho's amazing ability, and it is amazing, to move with the times, to adapt, to change his gimmick, and to always be on the cusp of something new, to always be innovative. You know, we all know that back to front anyway. In case you don't, here's just a run through of some of his gimmicks. We've got bratty heel Jericho, we've got babyface Jericho, we've got the Ayatollah of rock and roller, we've got suit wearing honest man Jericho, we've got the weird postmodern silent Jericho, where he'd come out and just would have the mic but wouldn't say anything, and gradually everybody got frustrated and that turned him heel very naturally. We've got List Jericho, of course, we've got Painmaker Jericho in New Japan, and we've got Le Champion in AEW, and now Babyface Jericho in AEW. I mean, we all know how great that is, and what a litany of different gimmicks that is, and how impressive most of them have been. So that's not going to be one of my 5 reasons. Instead, we are starting off with reason number 1, and it's quite a simple one. Chris Jericho has done everything. Jericho's back catalogue is quite astounding, not just the quality of it, but the breadth of it as well, from his early career breaking into the business and wrestling indies in Canada, to his younger years in Mexico and Japan as well, with promotions like CMLL and Wrestle and Romance. He was in Smoky Mountain with Lance Storm as a tag team guy, he was in ECW as well. I mean, Jericho pretty much did it all before he even got to the major leagues. And in those early years, everything that he was doing, all these different places he was going, these different characters he was meeting, the different styles of booking he experienced and storytelling, and the different styles of wrestling he himself was adapting to, that would have all helped him later on in his career do exactly what I mentioned just a second ago: innovate, evolve, and move with the times. Because Jericho and a lot of the best wrestlers are great at taking something, tweaking it, and presenting it again, but in an original way, whether that be something from outside the world of wrestling or something from within the world of wrestling, but elsewhere, and just changing it to modernize it effectively. And I have no doubt that a lot of what Jericho has done over the latter stages of his career probably came from inspiration from those early days. Then of course he went to WCW, and despite being a bit underappreciated and underutilized there, as many future WWE megastars were in WCW in the late 90s, he still managed to catch the attention as, I believe, one of the funniest heels of all time in the history of wrestling. And then of course he crossed the divide, went over to the other side of the Monday Night Wars and became, not immediately, but about a year in, he became a cool babyface. Do you remember how over Chris Jericho was in sort of the year 2000 as this upper mid-card guy trying to push through into the main event scene and eventually getting there, but maybe not quite as the babyface we'd hoped? And also, do you know how hard it is to be a cool babyface in a company where the other cool babyfaces of the time are The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin? And obviously all three guys had very different definitions of what was cool, but you got a real sense that their personalities were coming through, and Jericho's personality was as big as any of his contemporaries. He also managed to position himself as a top heel in WWE twice, I think, once as the Undisputed Champion, and then again a few years later as the suit-wearing Jericho, this new version of a heel inspired by old school heels and also from the world of cinema. That was masterful. The first heel run probably didn't pan out as we may have hoped for Jericho, but he did, go down in history as the man who unified those two big titles. His list of accolades is as long as you want it to be. I mean, he's been a WWE champion, he's been a multiple-time world heavyweight champion, he's been a United States champion, he invented the Money in the Bank ladder match. He's the only person, I think, who's ever taken bragging rights seriously, and I commend him for that. And on top of all of that, he's one of the greatest IC champions of all time, and he's enjoyed tag team success with many different partners, from Lance Storm to Edge to Christian to Big Show, and not all of those tag teams were supposed to be as successful as they ended up being. And then on top of all of that, you've got his accolades from the latter stages of his career as well, changing the game globally with New Japan Pro Wrestling, being the crown jewel and the first ever champion in AEW's crucial first year of existence. I think you could quite possibly make the case that Chris Jericho has done more globally in the industry than any other wrestler ever. That's crazy, isn't it? He's been a part of so many legendary moments and angles that he has two separate iconic moments centered around the concept of lists. They had me writing 2 lists a day back at What Culture when I first started as a writer about 5 years ago, and I've come nowhere near to Jericho's list-based success. That's very sad. He's never won a Royal Rumble though. He's never won a Royal Rumble, but he should have. He should have won the 2012 Royal Rumble, but Sheamus won it instead. Still, they had an exciting final stretch, didn't they? But he never quite did that. But who would honestly be that surprised if Jericho came back to WWE and won one eventually? It would be a little bit surprising, but if anyone could do it, Y2J's the man. Now, all of these achievements obviously don't just stand on merit. Wrestling's not a legitimate sport. They need to stick in our minds as entertaining or valuable somehow. And a staggering amount of Chris Jericho's big moments and achievements do stand out in the mind. And I believe that's down to reason number 2, his amazing ability to tell stories in a creative way. Jericho's best feuds don't really follow the standard path. Well, they kind of do. I mean, all the beats are the same. There's a big win here and a big loss there. There might be a betrayal here or there. There might be some heelish trickery or a big surprise at some point. They do have those tropes within them, admittedly. But it's the planning and the execution of these moments that makes them feel genuinely innovative, and I think that gives Jericho a big edge. Clearly, he has an incredible creative mind. One of Jericho's signature feuds came in his WCW days. It's probably been appreciated more now looking back on it than it actually was at the time, but it's his feud with Dean Malenko over the Cruiserweight Championship. And I mean, it gave us, first of all, the Man of 1004 Holds promo, which we will get to later on, don't you worry about that. But it wasn't just a comedy feud. This was a very intense, very personal rivalry between two men who are actually very close in real life. I don't know if they were at the time, but they certainly are now. Malenko was one of the guys checking on Jericho after what happened at Blood and Guts. Jericho beat Malenko to retain the title at Uncensored 1998, which caused so much hurt and grief to Malenko that he took time away from the ring. And then we get to Slamboree, a show which features what is seemingly at first a very innocuous battle royal to decide the number 1 contender for Jericho's Cruiserweight title, and they'll get a title shot against him immediately. But Jericho's not taking this very seriously. He's at his awful, obnoxious, heelish best. He's doing the ring announcing for all of these luchadors and lower card WCW guys, and he is ripping them to shreds on the microphone as they come through the curtain. He says things like, "This is Silver King. If he gets 12 more wins, he'll be upgraded to Golden King." And my favourite bit is right at the end when he's announcing Villano 4, and he goes, "Villano 4!" and he gets on one knee and throws up the 4, and I'm just like, Jericho, you are having an absolute ball here, aren't you? The Battle Royal is won by one of these luchadors, by Cyclope, which is a bit strange because Juventud Guerrero just jumps out of the ring and lets him win when they get down to the final 2, and it's like, why would Juvie do that? Well, it turns out he would do that because as Jericho gets in the ring to face Cyclope, very cocky as always, Cyclope removes his mask, and it's Dean Malenko. And the pop, if you've never seen this moment, watch it. The pop is astounding, which is a real testament to how well they built this feud. Jericho's reaction makes it as well, but it's absolutely phenomenal. Now, I want to jump to one of Jericho's later feuds. We're going 10 years later, in fact, to his feud with Shawn Michaels. And this feud was just moment after moment after moment, but they weren't rushed. The pacing was astounding here. It all kind of started when Jericho slammed HBK's head into the obscenely expensive Jeritron 5000. This provoked Michaels into facing Jericho before he was ready at the Great American Bash 2008, and Jericho won in shocking fashion by referee stoppage. That kind of meant that Michaels wasn't too interested in a rematch until we got that infamous angle where Jericho inadvertently punched Shawn Michaels' wife. That set up a rematch. I mean, that would set up a rematch, wouldn't it? Michaels destroyed Jericho at Unforgiven 2008 before we got an incredibly shocking development as CM Punk was jumped backstage and couldn't defend his title in the main event scramble. And we got his last minute replacement. It's Chrissy J, but he's not in a good state, guys. Somehow Jericho wins that match, becomes the champion, and we get another violent swerve in the storyline. But it's not an unrealistic one, it's not a silly one, it's all very serious, and it's all very emotional. And I think it's a bit of a masterstroke. That, of course, all leads to No Mercy 2008, where Jericho and Michaels have that awesome ladder match, and Jericho finally wins. The good guy doesn't always win in these feuds, you know, but Jericho fans were absolutely delighted, of course. And again, I worry that I'm not saying anything too innovative here. Hopefully, for those who don't know either of those feuds, maybe I've shed a bit of light, maybe you're quite excited by that, but I feel like I'm not really saying something that hasn't been said before in different ways. But I want to focus on something that I feel has been overlooked in Jericho's recent few years. Because for all the creative storytelling and all the accolades that he's won and all the things that he's done in the world of wrestling, we've kind of been blinded by that, and we may be guilty of forgetting slightly what a wrestler Chris Jericho can be. I think it's fair to say that Chris Jericho has incredible in-ring versatility, and that is reason number 3. I'll explain what I mean by that. Jericho, throughout the course of his career, has taken part in so many different types of matches and been excellent at so many of them. So we're going to take a look at a few examples right now of 3 very different matches indeed, but 3 which really encapsulate Jericho's all-round ability. And although I wouldn't put Jericho in quite the same bracket as some of the guys who started to make their way in the business at the same time as him, guys like Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio, I still think he's not too far off. He's still, you know, in his day, a top-tier pro wrestler. So we're going to take a look at a match between Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho very briefly from Fall Brawl 97. This match has quite a standard template. Jericho's actually the babyface here. Eddie is the heel challenger, going after the champion's belt and controlling the majority of the match. But that gives Jericho an excellent chance to demonstrate his technical ability on both the receiving end and on the offensive end as well. He's reversing a few things from Eddie, he's countering a few things here and there, but Eddie has got him in the majority of the submission holds, he's got control, and Jericho sells brilliantly. But the match really starts to pick up when we get these big inventive sequences a little bit further down the line, and it's really impressive given the furious pace that the match has been worked at up until that point, which you kind of expect, because it's Jericho and Eddie in the 90s. One spot that I can't think immediately of another time I've seen it before is when Jericho has Eddie on the apron and he's looking to powerbomb him off into the guardrail, but Eddie's obviously fighting that because that would be absolutely devastating. So instead, Jericho just kind of jumps down and lets Eddie's head bounce off the top rope, but then Eddie sells it wonderfully as well and staggers to the floor, collides with Jericho, who's waited in just the right place at the right time, and he gets propelled into the guardrail. It all happens so fast, but what an inventive sequence that is. The finish is really cool as well. Jericho chains a few power bombs together, plonks Eddie onto the top rope, heads up top for a superplex, but Eddie reverses the superplex in midair fantastically, and it looks really flashy from Eddie's point of view. It's certainly his spot, his moment. But think of the strength that Jericho needs there to be able to hold Eddie still as he's falling backwards and anticipate the movement and keep control all the way down to the canvas, where Eddie's then gonna land on him painfully. Moving on from that, I want to now go to WrestleMania 19 with Jericho's match against Shawn Michaels. Before the feud that we talked about in 2008, this was WrestleMania 19, and it was essentially a match that we I think consider more Jericho's kind of thing these days. That's because it was wrestled at a bit of a slower pace in front of a large audience on a big stage, you might say the grandest stage of them all, and it gave Jericho plenty of breathing room to really milk those character moments that he really excels at. The background of this match is that Jericho is wrestling his idol, Shawn Michaels, but he thinks he's better than Shawn now. He thinks he's surpassed him, and that gets told through spots such as Jericho stealing the kip up and the taunt that Michaels does, but then Michaels kips up behind him and the crowd all come unglued. It's very good stuff, but it's just a little taster of what's to come. Because what comes next is that Jericho actually steals the Sweet Chin Music, a very Jericho version. He does a bit of dancing beforehand with his feet, like Shane McMahon almost, weirdly. It's a great false finish. There's quite a few good false finishes in this one actually, such as Michaels going for the Sweet Chin Music of his own, Jericho avoiding it and locking in the walls of Jericho, but Michaels makes the ropes. You've also got Michaels hitting the super kick on Jericho, but Jericho survives that only to fall to a cheeky roll-up from the Heartbreak Kid. And it is heartbreaking for Jericho because he really thought he was going to win. And Jericho's heartbreak is made very clear after the match. We get that now legendary moment where Jericho goes for the handshake and he's like, man, you've done it, you've beat me, what a match we've just had, thank you so much. Bang! Low blow, Shawn Michaels, you have been fooled, you've been bamboozled by Y2J. And the third match that I want to talk about is the one against Kenny Omega at Wrestle Kingdom 12, but unfortunately we can't really focus on specific moments from that because New Japan won't allow us to show images, or this video might get taken down. So I'm not bitter about that, it's fine. Said a lot of nice things about New Japan over the year, it's fine. But again, that match demonstrates Jericho's versatility in the ring, something that I don't think he gets enough credit for, because this is totally different. This is the sort of match that we associate, I think, in our minds with latter day Jericho. It's a wild no DQ brawl. Jericho's had quite a few of those recently, but this is unquestionably the best one. A lot of that's down to the fact that yes, he was wrestling one of the guys who was the best in the world around that sort of time, Kenny Omega, but at the same time, Jericho more than held up his end of the bargain. And at the age of, I think, 47, got a 5-star match from Dave Meltzer. I know that that's just one man's opinion, but Meltzer's seen quite a lot of wrestling in his day, so it's quite a good barometer. And I don't even personally agree with the rating myself, because it was Meltzer's highest ever rating given to a Jericho match, I believe, but I don't think it's Jericho's best match. At the same time, I do think it's very, very good. Moving on from his in-ring stuff, now more to the outside of the ring stuff, which I think Jericho is probably more famous for. And if you're as good a wrestler as Chris Jericho, the fact that you're more famous for this thing is very, very impressive indeed. It means he's a real star on both sides of the equation. We're talking about his charisma, of course. I mentioned it briefly earlier, I said we'd bring it up later again. We're talking about the man of 1,004 holds. This is genuinely one of my favorite comedy bits in wrestling history. It comes from that Malenko feud where Malenko was known as the man of 1,000 holds. So Jericho claimed, actually I checked and you only know about 60, whereas I know 1,004. And then again, if you've not seen this, you need to. He then produces a comically large list of holds and reads them one after the other. Most of them are armbar. There's a few different ones in there as well. There's a few ludicrous ones. One of my favorite parts that doesn't get mentioned enough is where we're about to go to commercial break and then we come back and he's still going. But we're about to go to commercial break. He's on like 0.7 or something and he goes, number 8. Right-handed punch, and then it goes to commercial, and it's just so funny because you know the left-handed punch is coming next, but you don't get to hear it. Jericho in his prime could do comedy with the best of them in wrestling history. Jericho later kind of stamped out the comedy side for a while, didn't he? Because that's what people wanted, and he wanted the people to boo him, and he became the honest man, the suit-wearing Jericho. And that character was kicked off by that feud with Michaels that I was talking about earlier, where he threw him into the obscenely expensive Jeritron 5000. But we're not talking about that moment anymore. We're talking about the promo before he attacked Michaels. That promo is excellent because it's really meta, but in like two ways. One, it's very meta. To sound like such a nerd, it's very meta, guys, because it's a clear callback to the barbershop window when Michaels turned on Jannetty. There's obvious similarities in the setup. I imagine that was probably their idea, Jericho and Michaels. It's also really meta because while cutting the promo, Jericho's manipulation of the crowd is top tier. He knows exactly what he's doing. Because Jericho's bringing up these slightly devious, slightly deceitful things that Michaels has done to him in the recent past. And he's saying, you know what, Shawn, when you were doing those things, the crowd were cheering you and they were booing me, but I was the honest man. I was the one doing the right thing. And when he says that, right on cue, the fans cheer Shawn and boo Jericho. And Jericho, still a babyface at this point, is wincing and fighting it, and he's going, yeah, that's what they're doing, and I can't understand it. And what we're seeing here, and why I think it's such a powerful moment, is a babyface turning heel in real time before our eyes. And Jericho plays it off perfectly. But he can also be on the opposite side of that. He can be the one getting betrayed, getting beaten down, as we saw in the famous Festival of Friendship segment alongside Kevin Owens. And again, Jericho excelled in that too. I don't want to dwell on that one too much because everybody knows about it. Everybody's talked about it to death. But I also wanted to save a little bit of room to talk about my favourite Jericho microphone moment of all time, his WWF debut in 1999 on Raw. A lot of people say that Kane's debut is the best debut in WWE history, and I understand that opinion. For me, it's number 2, just behind Chris Jericho's debut, where he interrupted, of all people, The Rock. I wasn't yet a wrestling fan when this moment happened, but when I later on went back and saw it for the first time, it absolutely blew my mind. His charisma is like a whirlwind in this. It just blows you away. You can feel it coming through the screen. And the reason that it's so genius as well is because for any fans of just the Fed at the time who didn't know anything about his past in WCW, didn't know who Chris Jericho was, it gave you everything you needed to know about him in the first few moments. You can sense his arrogance, you can sense his cockiness, but you can also sense the fact that he really wants to entertain even though he's a heel. He fancies himself this ringleader, this showman, this great showman. This is the greatest show. Too far, Jack. And then, of course, once Jericho has said his piece and torn it apart, The Rock gets on the mic and tears Jericho apart. And Jericho's facial expression is that of a little kid who's been told that it's past his bedtime and he needs to get upstairs now. And that's crazy, man. I really think that's an incredible thing to happen because this is Jericho's debut. This is his big moment. He's just cut the promo of a lifetime and now he's being very vulnerable in front of The Rock. And that leads me to point number 5, a point so pretentious sounding that I'm ashamed to even say it out loud. But yes, point number 5 is Jericho's vulnerability. His vulnerability is why he's one of the greatest of all time. It sounds stupid. I will explain. How many times has Chris Jericho made himself look stupid to get someone else over? Only recently we saw him be pushed into a pool of mimosa in that match with Orange Cassidy. We saw him blindly walk into a betrayal at the hands of Kevin Owens, a betrayal that everybody saw coming, apart from Jericho. He was arrogant enough at one stage to think that his pre-match attack on Jon Moxley of all people had worked, one of the most resilient wrestlers around today, and he was foolish enough to still have that match with him and lost the AEW Championship, looking very stupid in the process, which we all loved. The entire comedic heel WCW phase of his career was just essentially a sequence of moments where Jericho made himself look very vulnerable and very insecure and occasionally very foolish as well. At that point, that was a little bit different because that didn't have the effect of getting other people over. That got Jericho over, man. That really endeared him to the audience, which was crucial at a bit of an early stage of his career. But allow me to get a bit more pretentious, dear viewers, because Jericho's vulnerability isn't just in kayfabe. Jericho allows himself to be vulnerable in real life as well. He takes risks. In his recent podcast appearance with Steve Austin, and I think he's also touched upon it in other places as well, but Jericho mentioned his match with Kenny Omega in New Japan at Wrestle Kingdom and how that may have been one of the reasons why AEW even exists today. It's not the only reason, of course. You've got the ludicrous popularity of the Bullet Club. You've got Cody Rhodes' decision to really bet on himself and embark on this grand tour of the Indies. You've also got the general 2-decade-long hunger of wrestling fans across the world for a genuine competitor to WWE. But Jericho's move to New Japan was certainly a big reason. Jericho versus Omega was a crucial spot because it proved that these two guys could draw a huge crowd of unfamiliar fans to a different promotion, and it proved that Jericho could be the driving force behind another such move in the future. And that is exactly what happened. And the reason that it's such a risk, and the reason that I admire Jericho's willingness to be vulnerable and to take such a risk, is because he didn't need to do it at all. He could have stayed in WWE as long as he wanted and collected paycheck after paycheck after paycheck, guaranteed, for a long, long time. How many megastars have we seen do just that and stay in WWE, and through no fault of their own? I'm not blaming them for wanting to make money for themselves, of course, but through no fault of their own, still take the spotlight away from younger, hungrier talent who really need that spotlight more. Jericho didn't do that. Jericho decided to take a risk and enhance not only himself at a late age, but also enhance those around him too. And in doing so, he not only changed the course of his career forever, he changed the course of pro wrestling forever. Oh, that's a dramatic line to end on. Let's linger on that for a second. Thank you very much.